Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another meal prep video. I don't know about you guys, but I have been lacking some serious motivation in the kitchen lately, and so I thought this week it would be best for me to meal prep some things so that my family and I could stay on track with dinners and lunches throughout the week. This week I'm going to be going back to my new favorite meal prepping cookbook, which is Cook Once, Eat All Week. It is kind of a unique cookbook. I really like it. It basically has 3 main ingredients every week that you can use to make 3 dinners out of for meal prep. This week's ingredients are rice, ground beef, and carrots. And out of these ingredients, I'm going to be making Korean beef bowls, as well as a taco casserole and barbecue bacon meatloaves. I'm also going to be making a creamy garlic salad dressing that I can use for a side for dinner one night, as well as meal prepping salad for myself for lunch. I'm also going to make some ham salad from some leftover ham that we had from Easter.
What?
As well as the best recipe for chocolate chip cookies. So if you guys want to stay home and meal prep with me, let's jump in and see what we're cooking this week. Okay, so here I'm just showing you guys kind of the roadmap for the meal prep this week. What's really nice about this book is that even if you are a experienced meal prepper or you're new at meal prepping, it's great because it sort of lays everything out for you so you don't have to think about it. What I'm going to start out by doing is browning my ground beef. In total for the 3 meals, I had 5 pounds of ground beef, but I'm going to brown up about 3.5 pounds of it. That will be for the Korean beef bowls and the taco casserole. For the remaining ground beef, you'll want to leave that in its raw form because we're going to be making a meatloaf out of that. Also called for in this meal prep is some cooked white rice. I'm using brown rice because that's what our family prefers, and I like to cook it in my Instant Pot, but you could use the stovetop if you wanted to, or a rice cooker as well. I will link the recipe down below that I use to cook my brown rice, but essentially I just put it into the Instant Pot with equal amounts of water and a pat of butter and some salt and cook it on 15 minutes high pressure. After the beef was done cooking, I just went ahead and drained out the fat, and here is my rice. That's all done. So the idea behind making the rice ahead of time is that you can just refrigerate it and then use it for 2 of the meals throughout the week as you need it. So here is my completed prep of my rice, my ground beef. I also washed up some cilantro. The next thing I'm going to prep is some carrots, and these are going to be roasted alongside the meatloaf. The recipe actually calls them carrot fries, and I've made these before and my kids really like them. I think it's a good way to use up carrots, and it's a good way to get veggies in your kids, especially if you maybe have pickier kids and they do like carrots. This is a good way to get some more veggies in them. So here's what the barbecue bacon meatloaf dish is going to look like once we prepare it. Essentially, all you have to do ahead of time is cut up the carrots and toss them with some olive oil, salt, and pepper. The actual cookbook calls to roast them ahead of time, but I guess I didn't really see the point of that. I do think it's a time saver to cut the carrots up and toss them with olive oil and salt and pepper. But as far as roasting them ahead of time, I'd prefer to roast them fresh the night I'm going to eat them. So I'm just going to cut these into fry strips, and I'm putting them into a container, and I'll put those in the refrigerator for when we eat later on in the week. So these are just seasoned really simply with olive oil, salt, and pepper. You could add other seasonings if you wanted to. I think that garlic powder would be good, or maybe some type of like a smoky or a barbecue seasoning, but we just kept it simple, and it is really a time saver to season those ahead of time. All you have to do then when you're ready to make them is dump them out on a baking tray and roast them in the oven. So now I'm going to prep the barbecue mini meatloaves, and I did add some breadcrumbs and a
little bit of half and half to this recipe just because that's normally how I make my meatloaves. I think for this particular author, she was trying to keep most of these recipes gluten-free, but we do not eat gluten-free. And so I did go ahead and add the breadcrumbs. But other than that, I kept it pretty much the same as the recipe in the cookbook. So in with my ground beef, I added onion powder, some barbecue sauce, breadcrumbs, an egg, salt, pepper, and some breadcrumbs. If I didn't already say that, I think I did. And then basically just mix it together until it's all combined. I like to use a fork to mix my meatloaf because I think that it does a good job of mixing up the meat while not packing it down. It keeps the mixture light so that your meatloaves stay tender. Now, I was going to separate this into 4 mini meatloaves like the cookbook said, but I just decided to form it into one big loaf, which is normally what I do when I make meatloaf. I find it better to shape it into a loaf on a cookie sheet. That way, when you bake it in the oven, the grease will sort of, drip off from the meat. If you bake it in a loaf pan, it tends to stay a little bit greasier. So I drizzled some barbecue sauce over the top, and then I'm just adding some bacon that I cut in half, and that's it. You can make this, I would say up to 3, maybe 4 days ahead of time, and just keep it in the refrigerator. I put this out in the garage refrigerator just like this, covered up with foil, and it was seriously a time saver. All I had to do when I was ready to make dinner that night was take it out of the fridge and pop it in the oven. So on the night that I cooked this, here are my carrots. I just tossed those out onto a cookie sheet that I lined with parchment paper, and I'm roasting those in the oven along with some baked potatoes that we are going to have for dinner as well. So here's what the meatloaf looked like after it came out of the oven. Don't mind that burnt part on the cookie sheet. That doesn't affect the taste of the meatloaf at all. It was perfectly cooked through. I also made some baked potatoes with this, but you could leave those out or make another side if you wanted to. And then here are the carrot fries. Like I said, my kids really, really enjoy these, and they're a great alternative to regular carrot fries. So this was a really great meal and a crowd pleaser, and it was so quick to put together, especially since I had most of it prepped ahead of time. All right, so the next dish that I'm going to show you guys is the Korean beef bowls. This is another one that comes together super quickly after you have everything prepped. Here's a look at the recipe. The first thing that I'm going to do is start out by prepping the sauce that goes in with the beef. And for this, you want to reduce down a bottle of coconut aminos. I did not have quite a whole bottle. I had maybe 3/4 of a bottle, but that's all I had on hand, and so that's what I used. I think you could probably use soy sauce instead of coconut aminos if you didn't have any, but I would definitely use the low sodium soy sauce instead of the full sodium soy sauce. So while that is reducing, I am going to make the pickled carrots for this dish. So into a mason jar, I'm putting some apple cider vinegar, some salt, some sugar, and some peppercorns. And all I'm going to do is just cut these carrots up into matchsticks. You want to try and cut them as small as you can without cutting yourself. I was going to try and shred them, but I thought it might be a little bit too fine. If I would have had like pre-shredded carrots, I think that would have been the right size, but I didn't. And so I'm just kind of cutting these up into as small of pieces as I can and getting them in with the vinegar mixture. This will be ready after a day, and it gets even better as it sits in the refrigerator. And you can definitely play around with the brine for this. If you want it sweeter, add more sugar. If you don't want it sweet at all, you can leave the sugar out. You can also add red pepper flakes if you want it spicier. So once everything is in the jar, just give it a shake to make sure that all of the sugar and salt are dissolved into the pickling brine. And then that goes into the fridge to do a quick pickle. When we're ready to assemble the bowls, we'll put those on top, and it makes a great addition to those. Okay, so once the coconut aminos was reduced into sort of a syrup consistency, that takes about 8 to 10 minutes. I went ahead and poured it into a small mason jar, and I'm just going to go ahead and make the sauce in here just because it will be easy enough to shake it up rather than stirring it. So to this, I'm adding some ginger paste, a few cloves of garlic, and some red pepper flake. I think the original recipe called for ground ginger, but or actually it called for ground ginger and ground garlic, but since I had fresh on hand, I figured it was best to use those. I also added some toasted sesame oil and some fish sauce, and I think I ended up adding a little bit of lime juice to this as well, and some rice vinegar, just because I thought it was a little bit too sweet, but definitely play around with the flavor until you get it to your liking. So when it's time to cook this dish, you can just take your ground beef out of the refrigerator and put it into a pan with the Korean sauce. I used a little bit of hot water just to get the remaining sauce out of the jar, and then just warm that up on the stovetop until it was all heated through. Next, I'm going to make the sriracha mayo that goes on these. This is something that I should have done ahead of time, but I ran out of time when I was meal prepping, so I just went ahead and did it when we ate dinner that night, which worked out fine. So in a small bowl, I'm just adding some mayo, some sriracha, and some lime juice and stirring that up. You can add sriracha to taste. If you want it spicier, add more. My kids did not eat this on their bowls, but Adam and I did, and we've obviously had sriracha mayonnaise before, and it's really good on something like this. Next, I'm going to chop up some cucumber. I just had a small little Persian cucumber that I chopped up to put on the top of our bowls. And I also decided to shred up some carrot. I didn't think my kids would be huge fans of the pickled carrot that I made. And I had them try some, and I was right, they didn't really like them. So instead for them, I just went ahead and grated some fresh carrot and put those on their bowls instead. So here's a look at what the completed bowl looks like. We have rice and beef, some pickled carrots. There's a couple eggs on there, which is hard to see, that I fried up, some sriracha mayo and cilantro and green onions, and they were totally delicious. All right, so the last dinner for meal prep I'm going to show you is this taco casserole. This also ended up turning out really good, and it's probably something that, even though it's a simple recipe, I wouldn't have thought to make. So in my bowl, I have some brown rice. That's the remainder of the brown rice that I prepped, and I'm just going to chop up some cilantro and add that to the rice. The original recipe basically calls for lime and cilantro, add to the rice, and that's your base for the casserole. But if you see there on the screen, I actually had a little bit of queso left over. I had made that on the weekend for Adam when we were, I don't know what we were watching, or I don't know what we were doing, but I just made basically the Rotel Velveeta queso, and I decided to put it in here because I thought it would be good, and it was. I also added a can of Rotel, and I'm also adding some shredded pepper jack cheese up as well. I thought cheese would be good in this, and it was, and even though the original recipe didn't call for that, there was things that I was trying to use up in my fridge, and so I added them, and it worked out just fine. So next, I'm going to put this rice mixture into a dish, and I soon find out that this dish is way too small because I have yet to put the ground beef on top of there, and so you'll see in a little bit that I nixed that and put it into a 9x13 pan. So take it from me, use a bigger pan to start out with. For the ground beef, I'm basically just going to season this just like you would taco meat. So cumin, paprika, oregano, garlic powder, onion powder. What else is in there? Chili powder maybe. And then I did add a little bit of water just to kind of make sure that all of the spices got incorporated. But basically you just want to stir this up, and then this will go on top of the rice mixture before you bake the casserole. The other great thing about this casserole is that you can totally assemble it ahead of time too, which is what I was doing. And then I actually cooked a smaller one to show you guys, which you'll see in a little bit. So since I was making this ahead of time, I went ahead and covered it with foil and put that in the refrigerator. And then it was ready for us when we were ready to eat later in the week. All I had to do was pop it in the oven. So here's a look at how it comes out. I topped it with some shredded lettuce, some guacamole, cilantro, and it was so good. I would definitely recommend making that. Okay, so next up, I'm going to share with you guys a new recipe that I tried this week for creamy garlic dressing. Here are the ingredients that you'll need. You'll need some mayo, some red wine vinegar, as well as a couple of garlic cloves that I put through my garlic press, some Worcestershire sauce, a few different spices, so oregano, paprika, some whole grain mustard, salt and pepper, and then not pictured is a little bit of milk that I used to thin the dressing out as well. So I really wanted to make some homemade salad dressing because I feel like sometimes when I have a really good dressing in the fridge, it just kind of helps me eat more salad, and I'm more excited to eat salad and more excited to take it with me to work for meal prepping. And I was looking online, and this is the recipe that I found, and I definitely think it's a keeper. I just kind of wanted something different than ranch. So the recipe is pretty self-explanatory. I'm just putting a cup of mayo into my glass measuring cup there, and then putting in the rest of the ingredients. So the original recipe called for 1 clove of garlic minced, but since it was a creamy garlic dressing, I thought that it needed 2, so that's what I did, and it turned out fine. I would definitely not skimp on the sugar in this recipe. It does call for 1.5 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, which makes it quite tangy. So you definitely need that sugar to balance out the acidity of the vinegar. After everything is mixed together, or after everything is together in your measuring cup, you can just go ahead and whisk that up. You could also use a blender or a food processor if you wanted to. And depending on how thick you like your dressing, you might want to add some milk to this, which is what I ended up doing. When I stirred this up, to me, it was more of like a dip consistency than a dressing, which is totally fine. If that's what you want to use it for, you could definitely dip vegetables in it and it would be delicious. But since I wanted to use this as a salad dressing, I probably added about 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup of milk just to thin it out. Whenever I make homemade dressing, I like to store it in mason jars. I just think that it keeps really well and it's very convenient. So I'll get that into the fridge and I'll show you a little bit later how I'm using it for a meal prep. So I also went ahead and chopped up some lettuce. I was actually doing this for a side for dinner one night, but actually, also decided to cut up some extra for a salad the next day, which is what I do frequently. So if you guys haven't watched me wash produce before, which I'm sure a lot of you have, if you are not new here, I like to use my OXO salad spinner. They've actually been on sale on Amazon over the past few weeks, so I'll link it down below. They've been down to $20 a lot of times, which is really great. I use it to wash all of my produce, not just my greens. So what I'm doing here is just chopping up some romaine hearts, and I like to chop those, put them into my salad spinner. I squeeze in about half of lemon juice, and then I soak the greens in cold water and then spin them dry. And the lemon juice helps keep the lettuce from going brown in the refrigerator, and the cold water soak will actually help to rehydrate your greens, especially if you have lettuce that's been sitting in the fridge for a while. It will help to rehydrate that. So here I am just squeezing my lemon in there, and then I'll let that soak in really cold water to get cleaned off. Here I am again, shredding carrots. I don't know why, but I've just been liking them in salads lately. So I am going to shred up just 1 carrot for our salad for our dinner this night. And then the rest of it I'm going to use to meal prep my salad for lunch the next day. I know that you can buy pre-shredded carrots, but I just think the ones that I shred myself taste so much better. So here's a look at the salad that I prepped with my creamy garlic dressing. I just have some tomatoes on there with carrots and lettuce and cucumber. And then anytime that I have leftovers, like on this particular night, we had chicken piccata, I always try to portion them out ahead of time just so it's easier for me to reheat them, and that's regardless of whether we are eating at home or at work. Okay, next up is some ham salad.
Are we grinding bologna?
No, Zach, we are not grinding bologna, but we are grinding ham. So I had to include these clips in here because I thought it was so funny when I watched Zachary Michael's videos a couple weeks ago about the ham salad. I'm sorry, not the ham salad, the bologna salad. But for some reason, it just reminded me of that because my grandma used to make ham salad and bologna salad when I was growing up, and she had a hand crank grinder that she would put on the edge of the table, and she would grind up ham, and she would grind up like Velveeta cheese in with the ham, and then she would mix it with like mayo and Miracle Whip, and she would make these delicious ham salad sandwiches. And so I thought I would meal prep some ham salad this week since we had extra ham left over from Easter. If you guys have never had it before, I would encourage you to try it. It might sound weird if you've never had it before, but it's actually one of Adam's favorite things.
No.
We're having bologna and cheese.
No.
Put cheese in it. We like ham salad.
What?
But we'll go through all of them eventually.
Okay, so all you have to do for ham salad is just put your chunks of ham in a food processor and pulse it until it is fine.
Ma'am.
If you don't have a food processor, I honestly don't think that you can make ham salad.
If you don't have any of this, you could do it in a food processor. Just pulse it until you get the texture you want.
So, I mean, I take that back. If you had some kind of a grinder, you could use that as well. All right, so here's what the ham looks like after it has been ground up. You don't want to turn it into mush, but you definitely want to get it fine enough that it's going to be able to be incorporated in with the mayo and everything else that we're going to add to it. So to start out, I'm just going to put my ham into the bowl, and this is one of those recipes where you basically just have to measure with your heart.
Pickles.
Is she putting pickles in there now?
Get some of them, put some in here.
I hate
You can get the relish.
pickles.
It's already ground.
So yeah, I don't put pickles in mine, but I do put dill pickle relish. So in with the ham, I added mayo, pepper, and some dill pickle relish, and then I gotta taste it.
Oh my God, the smell of bologna. She is strong out here, y'all.
And the best way to taste it is, of course, on a saltine cracker.
Let me repeat, it's gonna be fine. Life will go on. Your little beauty bite.
All right, so here's a little bit of the ham salad on saltine crackers. Adam and I shared these for a bedtime snack on this night.
But I don't hate this. I kind of hate that I don't hate this.
Okay, so after I mix that up, I'm just going to go ahead and stick it in the refrigerator. It actually does taste better after it sits in there for a while, kind of like a lot of different salads, but this is good on crackers, or you can also eat it on toast or bread, and we had that meal prepped for the week. All right, so last but not least, I'm sharing a new recipe that I tried for chocolate chip cookies. This recipe claims to be the best chocolate chip cookie recipe ever, and we tried it, and I think it was one of the best chocolate chip cookie recipes ever. So in my mixer bowl here, I have some white sugar, some brown sugar, and I'm going to put in 2 sticks of butter. I will link this recipe down below if you want to try it. You can maybe make the argument that chocolate chip cookies are not meal prep, which I guess I would agree with. Chocolate chip cookies are not a meal, but during a pandemic, anything goes. And so if I want to meal prep some chocolate chip cookies, that's just what I have to do. So I am going to go ahead and cream the butter and sugar together in my KitchenAid mixer. And then next I'll be adding the eggs and vanilla and the dry ingredients. Definitely using my KitchenAid is my favorite way to make cookie dough. I could never go back to any other way. I think for years before I had a KitchenAid, I made cookies obviously with a hand mixer, but it's just so much easier, especially with the KitchenAid. So once all the dry ingredients are in and most of those are incorporated, I'm going to go ahead and pour in my chocolate chips. I actually found these like fancy, I don't know what they are. They're like fancy semi-sweet chocolate chips at Aldi randomly on sale. And I decided to get them and they were really, really good. So I would definitely buy them again if I saw them there. I have a baking sheet out here that I've just lined with parchment paper, and I am using a cookie scoop to set these out on the tray. These do spread out quite a bit, so definitely don't put them too close together. But the secret to making sure that your cookies are nice and chewy and not hard and too crispy is to take them out of the oven when they just start to brown and they're still a little bit underbaked. They will continue to firm up as you leave them on the baking sheet, and then afterwards you can put them on a cooling rack to dry, and they will firm up. So here's what they looked like when they came out of the oven. This is exactly what you want them to look like, nice and golden brown, but not burnt and not overdone. Just remove these to a cooling rack before I stored them.
All right, so that is going to wrap it up for this week's meal plan. I hope that you guys are enjoying me cooking out of this Cook Once, Eat All Week cookbook. It is an awesome cookbook. I have cooked quite a few recipes out of it now. My sister also has it and has cooked some recipes out of it, and she loves it as well. I'll have it linked in the description box below if you would like to purchase it and try it out for yourself. If you guys have any requests for upcoming meal prep videos for me, please leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.